Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Emma, and I'll be introducing you to Danilo and fielding questions at the end. But first, I'd like to pay my respect to the traditional and original owners of this land, the Muanina people, and to pay respect to those that have passed before us, and to acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal people who are the custodians of this land. Feel free online to add in the chat the lands of the places that you're joining us from. A big thank you to you all for coming, and a big thank you to Danilo, who's going to share his research with us today. Danilo is a human geographer and postdoctoral research fellow at CSIRO, and he'll be presenting to us on decolonising AI-driven conservation expertise. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Danilo. Welcome, thank you, and please tell us more about your really interesting work.
Thank you. Can you hear me properly? Yeah? Awesome. So I want to thank Professor Greta and the Center for Marine Sociology, as well the co-organizers of the webinar, for inviting me to present. Today, I will draw your attention mostly to the colonial debates associated with conservation data and artificial intelligence. I will link critical social science thinking with insights from my research to question the coloniality of digital conservation, and also identify alternative ways to address environmental injustice. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagara people as the traditional owners of the land where I'm speaking from today, Meanjin, Brisbane, here in Queensland. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the different places that people are joining this talk from, and pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. So first of all, I want to reflect with you about positionality. In social science, positionality, it is a crucial component of our research because it reminds us that all of us speak from a specific place, which are never neutral, universal, or objective. Knowledge is always situated in history, location, and context. And this recognition, it is really important for the colonial debates, because decolonizing knowledge starts when we consider how our personal stories merge with theory and praxis, making evident how knowledge reflects values and perspectives. So here I draw on the concept of speaking place, introduced by Brazilian Black philosopher Djamila Ribeiro. Speaking place means that everyone has a social position that affects what we can say and how others receive it. This social position intersects with race, nationality, gender, social class, sexuality, and other aspects of our identities. So as a queer Latin American researcher from a working class family, my approach to decolonial thinking, it is deeply shaped by my own experiences. As a first-generation academic, I have navigated from the periphery of São Paulo to international universities, where I understood there are certain ways of performing academic knowledge to ensure you are supported, visible, and celebrated. And these academic performances are strongly associated with race and the social class. And then dictated which forms of knowledge can be universal and powerful, and which knowledge can be considered specific, local, or irrelevant. So I see research practice as an important platform for us to question these established forms of scientific knowledge, particularly to elevate unheard voices and untold stories. While I'm not Indigenous or Black scholar, I connect with the struggles of academic exclusion and invisibility due to social class and patriarchy. So my work considers the importance of partnerships with communities, indigenous groups to challenge and transform these forms of scientific thinking. However, my presentation today gonna talk mostly about my conceptual and theoretical engagement, and it's not relying on my work with any specific community group. So given that, I want to start exploring the core topic of this webinar. As we know, big data and artificial intelligence are quickly transforming conservation research, and this includes the development and deployment of several technologies, including smart sensors, algorithms, analytical models that are expected to automate and optimize several steps of conservation monitoring, management, and policymaking globally. However, the creation and use of data-driven knowledge to inform several decision-making processes raised several concerns associated with bias, uncertainties, injustice, which can reinforce or exacerbate existing environmental injustice. Over the last few years, a growing number of assessments have shown that climate and biodiversity policies and targets are relying on bias and flawed data sets, which misleads the ways of tracking progress towards net zero and nature positive goals. And these issues have pointed out several questions about the legitimacy and integrity of environmental data. But these digital developments are not only affecting scientific evidence, conservation knowledge, but also have critical influence on social life. Several authors, including Hua Benjamin, who wrote Race After Technology, Kate Crawford, the author of Atlas of AI, and David Nemmer, who wrote Technology of the Oppressed, have shown that digital technologies are neither objective or neutral. They are always power-laden instruments, and their construction and applications have led to several social impacts, including racism, sexism, classism, and censorship. And a critical point is the fact that these consequences are never accounted for during the design and deployment of these technologies, and often affect already marginalized social groups. So in response, several social movements, practitioners, academics have started formulating on data justice approaches to understand both aspects. First, how we can understand the multiple digital impacts on places and people, but also what are the possibilities to enable collective power to dismantle these inequalities. So this includes open access movements that formulated the FAIR principles to ensure the credibility and the transparency of scientific knowledge, and indigenous-led movements as well that propose the CARE principles, which positions indigenous sovereignty to control data-driven decisions. In environmental contexts, data justice, it is a really new topic, has recently emerged to consider the importance of community access to data, particularly to ensure democratic decision-making processes. So initially, environmental data justice emerged in the US in 2016 as a grassroots movement to secure public access to databases and protect the rights of communities to clean and safe environments. It's strongly associated with environmental justice in the US. So this movement calls for equitable access to information and digital infrastructure. And building on these formulations, more recently, conservation data justice emerged as a field where practitioners and researchers are debating about how data affects conservation decisions. The main focus conservation data justice has been on how global conservation mapping, prioritization analysis, and land use of optimization models can shape decisions and harm people and places. So most of these studies have demonstrated several examples of serious ecological, privacy, and legal impacts of conservation data. This includes the misidentification of species in the ecosystems and also misdirection of land restoration priorities and the investments across the world. Most of the conservation data justice debates have been focusing on distributive, recognition, and procedural dimensions of justice. Last month, I was in Spain with the European Research Council project on conservation data justice, that it is led by the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And we had this meeting with a group of 30 researchers and practitioners from across the world, discussing these formulations of conservation data justice to understand what we want from this field, what are the different contributions from different groups, and the ways that we can deal with these emerging issues. So it is pretty much a new field that people are engaging in discussing and formulating. But however, conservation data justice, it is not really fully engaging with how scientific thinking shape conservation data in the artificial intelligence developments. So here I want to expand these dimensions of recognition, procedural dimensions of justice to also consider epistemic issues related to data and AI. Epistemic justice considers the recognition of the authority and elevation of multiple ways of thinking in decision-making. At CSIRO, we are working to embrace the consideration of indigenous, community, global south, histories, perspectives, and knowledge practices to question these power asymmetries in technological developments. So to support this understanding of epistemic justice, I draw on Latin American decolonial studies. Their work focuses on philosophical and theoretical critiques of coloniality, including analysis of how the discourses of modernization and globalization shape knowledge production. And I'm showing here some key thinkers in this area, including Aníbal Quinjano, Walter Mignolo, and Artur Escobar, who highlight the need to challenge Eurocentric knowledge production. And their work shows the continuing patterns of colonial power that shape scientific thinking as neutral, universal. They also demonstrate the colonial option that highlight the epistemic reconstitution from geopolitical marginalized places. So how the global south, it is also mobilizing diverse forms of thinking. So this includes the consideration of how Latin American social movements bring about a plurality of worldviews and relations to transform knowledge-making practices. So these decolonial perspectives align as well with indigenous leaders and thinkers in Latin America, such as Ailton Krenak and Davi Capenaua, who both deliver powerful decolonial messages, emphasizing the need for us to rethink modernity and embrace diverse forms of dreaming to regain our power, our place within nature. So translating this theoretical thinking into our research practice, we embrace the importance of not only recognizing the injustice and understanding the patterns of coloniality, but also identifying the ways that practices can disrupt and change conservation data justice in the artificial AI. So one of our outputs, it is this biological conservation paper on collaborative practices for conservation data. Here, we review the existing literature on conservation data by assessing more than 200 papers. And in this work, we collaborated as an interdisciplinary team of researchers to reflect our diverse approaches and actions to conservation data. So researchers from ecology, human geography, science and technology studies, and data science. So our findings show that conservation studies focus mostly on issues of data collection, particularly to promote community access to digital tools, digital infrastructure, support local training and capacity building, and the adoption of data protocols to support best practices for data collection. So mostly this step of the entire process of data production. So while there's this strong focus on data collection, the other dimensions of conservation data production, it is often neglected or poorly explored. But at the same time, these are critical steps that we need to think and negotiate research practices. So our approach unpack these different steps of data production to highlight that that there's a whole different layers and complexities associated with decision making and also the consequences for people and places. So these steps include data planning, data collection, data management, data processing and analysis, and data translation. For example, as part of data planning, it is crucial for us to think about how data is conceived. What are the ontologies associated with this data imagination? By questioning whose perspective counts in that process, and what are the potential data uses and applications. So our study shows that are emerging ethical data protocols and guidelines, such as the CARE principles and the FAIR principle that I just mentioned, but also it is emerging several ethical data protocols for conservation data production. But we identify few documented experiences of how these data practices are actually applied in practices, with particularly with communities, indigenous groups. So we need to better understand the applications, the importance, and how ethical protocols can really enable to plan all these different stages of data production actions. We also undertook a case study on large language models. We know everyone it is discussing, everyone it is really interested in chatbots. And then here we evaluated the justice implication of ChatGPT's answer to inform conservation strategies. So we asked ChatGPT 3.5 model 30,000 times questions about what, how, whose expertise, locations, and practices are the most influential to restore degraded ecosystems across the world. We then analyzed all these 30,000 answers. It was a really long, extensive process to understand mostly the justice dimensions of this conservation content, including epistemic issues. So not just recognition or procedural dimensions of justice, but also the knowledge and the legitimacy of the epistemologies around these contents. So this is our results. Our analysis of the chatbot answers reveal uneven geographical representation of expertise on ecological restoration. Most of the ChatGPT's responses relied on sources from the United States. We can see here in this figure. United States, Europe, Canada, and Australia. And at the same time, there's limited information from many African countries. In these African countries, they have international restoration policies and commitments. They are expected to restore 150 million hectares by the end of this decade. And we can also see there's a low representation of low and low middle income countries. And this is really concern because most of these places, they are expected to restore large scale areas, and they have policies in place, they are developing protocols, but ChatGPT, it is not considering this evidence or experiences. So in terms of the restoration expertise, ChatGPT also listed thousands of experts and hundreds of organizations who are engaging with ecological restoration globally. So here in this figure, we can see when we talk about gender, most of the experts are males from the US working at universities. At the same time, we check all the information, and then we got this information that 40% of these experts were not accurate. So had mistakes in terms of their names, wrong affiliations. So a lot of wrong information as well. But mostly reinforce experts from male academics from the US. And the most influential organizations that we can see here are international organizations, mostly international NGOs, such as IUCN, WWF, and government agencies, particularly from the US, and the top rank universities as well. And only 2% of the responses consider mentions associated with indigenous and community groups. This is also really concerned because we can see here a pattern of reinforcing who is shaping decisions, while the communities, the groups responsible for implementing restoration has poor visibility, and their experiences are often neglected. So our study demonstrated how large language models can reinforce the adoption of certain data sources. In this case, we can see a pattern that it is these data sources, it is reflecting North American and European expertise to inform global conservation goals. And this shows a process of centralizing big data in the technological production in rich countries, while transferring the responsibilities for conservation actions to the global south, because most of these restoration targets are expected that global south countries gonna deliver. We also can see here some power asymmetries in data production, and that it is revealing all these colonial legacies associated with Western research that often dismiss diverse experiences and perspectives. So you might say, yeah, this was like GPT 3.5. We now have a new model. So things are changing. Yeah, we agree with that. These technologies are evolving really quickly. That's why we also wanted to check and question how these technological solutions based on these new large language models may tackle these justice issues that we identified. So we undertook another assessment comparing 30,000 answers from the ChatGPT 3.5, these results that I just showed, with the new model, the ChatGPT 4. And then we analyze how the technological solutions that OpenAI is offering, it is addressing these ethical issues that we just raised in terms of conservation expertise. So with ChatGPT 4 model, OpenAI is promising that they're going to improve their answers by training the large language model with more parameters, and improving its memory and increasing data sources. as you know, like the model 4 includes access to online information. So here it is the idea that with technological solutions, we are able to tackle the problems with machine learning, algorithm design, including more data, further developing the models. We're going to be able to tackle issues such as the ethical debates that we are having here today. So our results that have been published on this journal, AI and Ethics, show that, yes, ChatGPT 4 improved the complexity of the answers. You can see the quality of the answers. It is more robust, more details, more descriptions, and also the accuracy. So I mentioned before that 40% of the answers from the previous model was invalid. And then now we can see that most of the answers, it is valid. So it is improving accuracy. The model is getting better in terms of delivering that issue. But in terms of the ethical issues associated with inclusion, diversity, and representation of experts remain the same. So we can see here in terms of gender, affiliation, and countries, it is pretty much the same results. So what do we want to say with that? If this finds it is showing to us that technological solutions alone do not address complex injustice and inequalities that we can see in conservation knowledge, but also in these new technological developments. Here, it is really important for us to consider co-design practices, human-centered design with diverse stakeholders, that it is able to embrace the perspectives and the social context in these digital innovations. So this also includes the role of social movements, grassroots, and community organizations in reclaiming their ways of thinking to shape these steps of data production and AI-driven technologies based on values of trust, shared responsibility, and mutual respect. So as part of our research project within the Value in Sustainability Future Science platform at CSIRO, we have been also questioning and analyzing the role and the legitimacy of conservation data in the process of decision-making. We wanted to expand this conventional critique of data extraction and data coloniality to also consider agency and transformations. So here we want to reflect on the importance of consider possibilities. How can we reimagine conservation data to enable diverse forms of engagement, participation, to tackle these issues that we have been exploring? So this is part of our project with the Land Restoration Fund here in Queensland, which it is, this study, it is under review now in People in Nature. So in this study, it is a conceptual formulation on conservation data infrastructure that we are bringing this idea of how data can also enable transformations. So here we are formulating on this concept of conservation data infrastructures, highlighting how conservation data sets are not only produced by technological and computational capacities, but also through institutional and social relations. And this is critical for us to consider and understand, because we can start understanding the possibilities of reimagining data systems and AI to rework the ways that we can direct practices, priorities, and policy making. So in conclusion, all these research pieces that I shared today with you present critical injustice concerns regarding conservation data and artificial AI. It is a field that it is evolving really quickly. We see every day that there are new developments, advancements, but at the same time, we need to really question the ethical and social responsibility issues associated with these innovations and the implications for people and places. So here, we really advocate for decolonial practices in data-driven conservation to consider and mobilize diverse voices and social contexts. And then it is really important for us to bring together these justice perspectives when we are talking about big data and AI. Otherwise, the result will be that we're going to enforce or exacerbate existing social harms, negative impacts, in power asymmetries, in conservation science and decision-making processes. So thank you very much. Here it is my contact details. And I'm free to answer any questions, have some reflections with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting talk. Are there any questions in the room or online for Danilo? I suspect you might have a question.
Hi, Danilo. It's good to hear from you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it is a little bit difficult to hear, but let's try. Yeah.
Where's the microphone? Is it in the center? I'll just move a little bit. Thank you so much. That was really great. I have about 100 questions for you, so I might actually reach out to you after this talk and see if we can line up a chat. But the one thing I'm really interested in is I'm assuming from some of your work with ChatGPT that so you asked it like thousands and thousands of times. I guess I'm curious to know like if you gave it any prompting before that, basically if you just use the system prompt. And the reason I'm asking that is because I wonder if you gave it some sort of pre-prompt where you asked it specifically to focus on some of the things that you've raised here, conservation, justice, you gave it some like material. If you could make it into a more useful tool for people to use to kind of build in some of these ideas. So rather than, you know, I think we always struggle with what the information and knowledge that we ourselves possess and then trying to reach out and expand, you know, our perspectives. Can we use tools like this in a responsible way to overcome some of the challenges you've highlighted here, recognizing that there are limitations? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, good points. So in terms, there's a component of the method here that you are bringing that we actually use ChatGPT not as a reinforced learning system, but as a large language model. So that means because the complexity of collecting all the answers and analyzing, we couldn't have this in interaction with the machine. So we only ask each question one time. And then you are bringing that other dimension, how we bring that dialogue with the machine, and then how the knowledge that we have can also be part of that. So using reinforced learning, and then we can also shape that with feedback loops. We haven't done that because that would create another layer of complexities, but we think it is important because in this case, with reinforced learning, we can see there are interconnection between the machine, the algorithm, and the people, what we know, what we think, and then how we can shape and reconfigure the directions of the answers. So this is what we need to do from now. We only use as a large language model first, but how I think there's a huge question here, how reinforced learning can really show different directions to AI, and then we can incorporate perhaps this cyborg perspective of human and machines collaborating together to build that knowledge.
Got questions in the room? Anyone else online? I have a question. Oh yeah, Delphi, go ahead. Did you want to speak your question?
Unmute myself. Thanks, Taylor. That was an awesome presentation as usual. It's really amazing work. And I don't have a question, actually. It was just following on from Scott's point, I think. And I think, you know, that's a different question, because most people aren't going to be preparing the ChatGPT in terms of focusing on equity issues and stuff. So if you're kind of presenting what the general population, how they would encounter data and expertise. Yeah. So that's all I have to say. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, we see how these technologies, it is evolving really quickly and having like specific applications for really specific contexts, right? So, and then we are also developing that at CSIRO. We have, for example, the Koala Chat, where we are building a large language model really based on reports, data sets, that it is not publicly available, but incorporating all of them to build a system that practitioners, policymakers can rely on that. So it is a very specific and niche large language model. So with time, we can see that this technology gonna be applied to specific sectors and places that might incorporate this nuance, the context, and give visibility to these issues. But at the same time, we have issues about data sovereignty, that it is a core component of data justice debates. Because one of the concerns that we had, I showed the results that only indigenous communities, community engagement, refers only like 2% of the answers. And then we were reflecting on that, what that means. Is it a good thing that OpenAI is not sourcing indigenous databases? So that means that indigenous groups, they have control of their data sets, or it is important to use this information to really feed the algorithm as well. So it is issues about control and sovereignty that we need to think at the same time that these models are evolving to be applied to specific sectors.
I guess following on from that question about, I really liked the CARE acronym that you raised early on in your talk, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts or opinions about how, reflecting on your work and your findings, how might we as everyday researchers work towards incorporating these elements into our work, or first steps towards that, and I guess linking that into your findings as well. Any thoughts on that?
I think there's a strong attention to the human ethics as part of our research that we need to comply with, and that becomes something really just procedures to be applied. So we have a bunch of forms, a bunch of procedures that we need to have in place in order to collect data from humans. I think CARE, it is questioning that practices to consider, well, it is not just you as a researcher using your ethical approach to collect data and protect your organization, right? It is also how we negotiate the research practices, considering, you know, all these different steps that usually ethics, it is not really covering. So when you're collecting data, what it is the collective benefit that you are generating, and then how you're going to share that benefit with research participants. Who is controlling the data in all the different steps, the responsibility, and then the ethics. So each one of these points, CARE, it is bringing a platform for us to negotiate our research. Instead of like undertaking data collection, that I think it is one of the issues with conservation science, that there's a whole engagement with, we need more data, we need to know better about the complexity of environmental change, and then now bringing the social. We are really interested in understanding how humans, communities are making decisions, engaging with these diverse issues. But how we can also not only collect data, not only use citizen science, distributing technology and offering training to community groups, but how can we negotiate the entire process, that supply chain of data that I was showing from the beginning, how we conceive data, right? What it is the ontologies, what it is the configuration of that data, why you are thinking that it is important to count number of species. Have you negotiated that with community groups, with what people want on the ground? So I think care from it is from indigenous engagements, indigenous-led approach. It is helping us to rethink science and research in that way. There's an important component of collaboration that human ethics it is not covering at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else in the room or online have any more questions?
I'll ask one more. So just curious to know, obviously you probably don't want to have to redo this study every time a new, more sophisticated model comes out. But I could imagine value in that. And so I guess I'm just curious if you guys have thought about, I don't know, devising some sort of standardized benchmark that we can use, or that, you know, because my feeling is that this will probably, these tools, large language models, whatever, are going to get more capable and sophisticated. And if people work towards it, we'll start to incorporate these ideas and they'll be better at this. And so I'm just curious if you guys have thought about a way of standardizing a metric, a benchmark, so that we can quantify that into the future and get a sense of how this is tracking.
Yeah, great question. We had several discussions about that. In this paper, we work in collaboration with quantitative ecologists, a large language expert in the large language model, natural language processing expert in the social scientists. And then we had a lot of discussions about having benchmarks and understanding whether are these results a reflection of the field? Perhaps we have like a less representation of female researchers because it is what it is in ecological restoration. Or, you know, like the information that we have coming from the US or Europe, it is also a reflection of the papers published. We were having like all these discussions and it was so difficult to try to build these benchmarks and standardize what it is expected, what it is, because at the same time we are working with justice issues. Justice, it is having 50-50. It is about having like so establishing some metrics to measure justice became a little bit difficult for us to navigate. So we decided to use as just to portray that reality. Okay, we have this, and this is demonstrating there are some patterns. And these patterns, it is also coming from the way that conservation science has been developed over the history. So there are asymmetries and the issues with that. In terms, I agree, like we need to think about these benchmarks and have like a long-term assessment. But it is so hard when you bring that together with critical social science theory, because we're gonna lose the nuance. So we had a lot of these discussions between technical people and social scientists, and understand, okay, there are trade-offs. If we start like tracking and establishing what it is expected, what it is justice, and putting numbers, perhaps we're gonna miss something here.
Thank you. It looks like, Rob, you have your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. It's probably more of a comment, and it's and thank you for your presentation, Danilo. And it's looking at the current slide that's on the screen. I'm thinking, because I've read a little bit about fair and care, and have some personal opinions about it, but when looking at Indigenous data, Indigenous knowledge, I think, Blade forgot the terminology. Indigenous data sovereignty is something that's really important to consider and to look at. And I don't know if you've looked at the work of some of the works by Maggie Walter at UTAS, Jacob Pren, and I think Claire Anderson. They've done some work in this space that might be worth looking at. Because I look at care, care is getting it out there, care is about being respectful, but it's also about, for Indigenous peoples, about being able to protect their knowledge in a manner that that respects what data should be shared, what data shouldn't be shared, but also where the benefits go from that data. So we typically have a situation whereby, there's bioprospecting where academies like universities and government organisations like CSIRO, not to specifically point at individual organisations, but research is driven around trying to look for to gain greater knowledge, and then somewhere along the line there's a commercialisation of that, and then who benefits from it. So that's a few of my sort of comments, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, really good points. Yeah, it is important to disentangle that. The FAIR principles, it is really associated with open science. And then I don't know in Australia, but for the European Research Council, it is a requirement for proposals to include FAIR. So you need to ensure that, which kind of platforms you're going to use to make sure that your data is findable, accessible, reusable, that it is complying with the open data for science in Europe. So it is really coming from the engagements. There are also several issues associated, right? Like considering care, that it is the point that you were just making, that it is about, like considering Indigenous leadership in shaping control and decisions of data. What do we mean with open access data, right? Is it every single data set should be open access, or we need also to consider that not having open access information and data, it is important to protect Indigenous sovereignty, for example.
Yep. Sorry, and I think related to all this, because I forgot to mention before, is obviously the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in being able to uphold and respect those articles.
Yeah. So there's a whole concept of self-determination that is really important to consider in this care principles, that sometimes there are trade-offs with FAIR.
Wonderful, thank you. Just a comment in the chat here from Cara. It's a really well presented research motivation and findings, and she believes that going forward there's tremendous opportunity to inform the design of technological improvements and the guardrails for its ethical use. She said, you haven't made the point exactly, but the design intent spans both technological requirements and influencing human behaviour. It's a two-way thing and needs to be reciprocal. Great work, Danilo and the team.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'd like to second that. It was a really fascinating presentation, and thank you for sharing your work. If there's no more questions in the room or online, going once. All right, then please join me in thanking Danilo, and have a great day.